An intense heat wave is strengthening its grip on the UK and large parts of western mainland Europe. France had its hottest night ever last night, according to the country's equivalent of the Met Office. That's the weather service here. And many countries are facing record temperatures. Things will get worse before they get better as the heat wave strengthens towards the end of the week. Well, this is the heat map across Europe. In France, more than half the country is in the maximum red alert zone. Temperatures in Spain and Portugal also are considerably higher than seasonal averages. The French Prime Minister says more than 40 people have drowned in the last week while trying to cool off. Elsewhere across France, 2 young children succumbed to apparent heat stroke after being stuck inside a car in the southern town of Carpentras. In Paris, temperatures are expected to reach 39 degrees today, rising to 41 on Wednesday. A rare red weather warning for extreme heat has been issued for large parts of southern England and Wales starting on Wednesday, with potential highs of up to 40 degrees Celsius. The current June record is 35.6. The Met Office Weather Service has warned of significant disruption to daily life, with travel plans likely affected and widespread school closures. Scientists say the heatwave is powerful evidence of how climate change is reshaping Europe's weather. Our correspondent in Paris, Hugh Schofield, told me how French authorities are grappling with the heat.
It is very, very hot here in 9 o'clock in the morning. It's now 27, 28 degrees. It's going to be going up to touching 40 later on here in Paris. Yesterday was a record of all time for the month of June across the country as a whole. And in some cities like Bordeaux in the west and Limoges, Rennes, they passed records for the whole year. It wasn't just a record for June. It was hotter yesterday than it has been even in July and August. So we really are in an exceptional period now. Half of the country is in the so-called red zone, where the maximum state of alert has been issued. The rest of the country, practically the rest of the country, all the rest of the country is in the orange zone. And that means that extra special measures are being laid on at schools. Many schools are shut. A lot of schools are sending their children home at lunchtime simply because the classrooms are too hot to live in, to teach in. A fair amount of traffic has been, public transport has been stopped as well. And in general, the watchword from the government is, if you can, stay at home and don't move.
Well, that's the picture in Paris. Let's go down to the south of the country and speak to my colleague Pierre-Antoine Denis, who is near Nice. Pierre-Antoine, this update now from the French authorities that, as well as that tragic story of the 2 little kids who seemed to die of heat exhaustion inside a car, we now know that 40 people died from drowning in water, trying to get relief from that extreme heat.
Yeah, absolutely. That figure that has therefore an increase from the weekend. We were talking about over 20 over 30 on Sunday. So more people, unfortunately, have died as a result of drowning over the weekend in France, including a tragic story involving 2 children, one 11-year-old and one 13-year-old in central France, one trying to rescue the other, and both of them ended up drowning. So it's very, very sad stories here. And unfortunately, the tale that this is a very, very serious heat wave, historic by its temperatures, but also by the number of people who are dying as a result of it here in France. And all the papers this morning are talking about trying to tell people, finding ways how to cool off, try to be safe in these conditions. Authorities have postponed exam seasons for some schools in France. And when we see temperatures rising well above 40 degrees in some part of the country, especially near Marseille and on the southwest of France, we don't really know when these temperatures will cool down. Some people say Thursday, some people say not until the weekend. So people here are extremely worried, I'll tell you that.
2003, I think it was, when there were so many deaths there, many of them from elderly people who were in large apartment blocks and the like. What is being told to them, particularly the most vulnerable there in France, in order to avoid a repeat of those kinds of awful scenes?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. 15,000 people died in the summer of 2003 during this long and sustained heat wave. And there is the real fear that we're in for a very, very similar summer, just by looking at the number and the data of how hot it was back then in June, and how it continued that way over the summer. So when it comes to vulnerable people, they're told obviously to not travel. The different hospitals in France are really on high alert. The government is currently in an emergency meeting to try and making sure that the hospitals here in France do not break in the face of this heat. That was one of the issues back in 2003, where the hospital system simply couldn't cope with the number of patients that were admitted. So there is a real fear that we're in for a very hot summer. Now, when it comes to the different parts of the France right now, it doesn't seem to be that the picture is too bleak yet, but with the temperatures still rising and will probably keep on going for a few more days, it's the vulnerable people, the elderly, the pregnant women have been told to stay indoors, not to travel, especially by the SNCF, the railway operator here in France, as they said that simply the tracks could not cope with that heat and there will be disruptions ahead.
Pierre-Antoine Denis in southern France, thanks very much. Well, Europe is the world's fastest warming continent, where temperatures are increasing twice the speed of the global average. So let's get a sense of how things look in Spain. Our correspondent in Madrid is Guy Hedgecoe. He told me what it's like there.
The heat wave is expected to peak today in Spain. We're going to see temperatures, we believe, of up to 44 degrees Celsius down in the south of the country near Seville and Cordoba. Now, that's not necessarily that unusual in the middle of summer for those areas of the country. What is unusual is to see those sort of temperatures before the end of June. That is very unusual. And also it's very unusual to see very high temperatures up in the north of the country. We're going to see temperatures of up to 40 degrees in the Basque Country in the north. That's normally one of the coolest areas of Spain. So that comes as a real shock for people up there. Now, the Basque Country is one of the areas that is introducing special measures to deal with the heat at the moment. For example, using these so-called heat refuges. Now, that's public buildings like churches or libraries or civic centres which have air conditioning, where people can just go in at the hottest part of the day and sit down, have a drink of water and wait until the hottest part of the day has passed.
Guy Hedgecoe in Madrid. Well, speaking at the London Climate Action Week, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for the world to act with far greater urgency to limit global warming.
Around the world, climate disasters are becoming more frequent, more destructive and more costly. And the World Meteorological Organization has warned we ain't seen nothing yet. El Niño is not just knocking on the door, it risks blowing the house down. Turning up the heat, disrupting food and water systems, and hitting the vulnerable the hardest. 10 years ago, world leaders agreed in Paris to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, scientists say average annual temperatures will exceed that threshold in the coming years. And the task before us is to strictly limit the overshoot, shorten its duration, and bring temperatures down below 1.5 degrees Celsius as fast as possible. Every fraction of a degree matters. Every moment counts. Because the higher and longer the overshoot, the greatest the risk of crossing planetary tipping points that trigger irreversible change.